Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of Exhalation written by Ted Chiang. This was first published in 2019. This is the second science fiction short story collection written by Chiang. The first collection was called Stories of Your Life and Others. The title short story of that collection, Story of Your Life, was turned into the well-received and critically acclaimed movie Arrival, which I watched and thought was amazing. That short story collection was also well received and well loved both within BookTube and within the wider literary world. I personally thought it was amazing. So this collection has got a lot to live up to due to how strong that first was. Personally, I think it lives up to it rather well, and it has some amazing writing, ideas and overall concepts. So I'll talk about the book as a whole, then talk about the individual short stories, although not plot-wise, more concept-wise, then I'll do an overview at the end. So overall, the 9 short stories that make up this collection use familiar concepts within science fiction, specifically concepts that ask fundamental aspects of what science fiction is, namely what humanity is, what humans are, and our place in the universe, and they do deep dives into human psychology and human physiology and our social interactions. That is what science fiction is good at, and that is what the 9 short stories delves into in different aspects, of which this book does it rather well. Anyway, so I will talk about the first short story straight away, and that is The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate. This is a time travel short story. I think it personally stands out, and it's one of my favourites of the collection. In fact, it deals with the idea of time travel in terms of if time travel was a very fixed amount into the past, specifically in this case 20 years previously, what would that mean for both yourself, and how would you resolve that in terms of a time paradox? Time paradoxes are always an issue that can be dealt with in interesting and curious ways, because of course if you go into the past, that past becomes the future, but then that becomes the past. It's a cycle, it's problematic. This deals with it in an interesting manner, and it questions if you could change the past, would it be worth it on a very fundamental level? Would you still be you? Would it change who you are? Because if you could change yourself, then you wouldn't be you anymore, would you? It asks some interesting questions on this area, which I know that I'm going to read all the short stories in this book again in the future because it was amazing, and this short story was an interesting start and a very strong start to this collection. So the second short story is the title story, Exhalation. This starts off with a description and the importance of what breathing means for living creatures, then goes into the story more in depth, specifically focusing on one individual who is not entirely human and his exploration and self-dismantling of his self, specifically his brain. He wants to literally take himself apart, his own mind, in a quite literal sense, to find out what makes him him, and by association what makes us us. Because if you were able to take yourself apart and dismantle yourself and then put yourself back together, would you still be the same person? And what makes humans humans? Are we more than physical flesh and blood? Are we something more, something spiritual? Is there more to life than this, or is there not? It asks some really curious questions, and it asks more than just what I've said, but suffice to say, this is a very curious one. It's powerful, slightly creepy because it's somebody dismantling themselves in a literal sense, but it's powerful and well written, and I thought it was really, really good overall. The third short story is What's Expected of Us. Now that short story is based around the concept of there is a new invention called a predictor machine. You only click the predictor machine just before it predicts that you're going to do it and does a little lie. This questions essentially self-determinism and choices, because if you only click this thing right before it predicts you're going to click it and actually lights up, does that mean you're always going to, or does it mean that you are kind of forced to click it because you know it should be clicked? It's a strange question, and one that it doesn't give you an entire answer for, but it does provide some interesting thoughts, which science fiction does well, on self-determinism and how, if you make a decision, is that decision one that you know you want to make, or is that just because you think you want to make a decision and actually it's not really a decision at all. You're ultimately it's somebody else's idea, but you think it's yours. It plays around with ideas of choice and who determines what in life, and it does it in a very curious way, which I really did like and thought was a really powerful overall concept and really did enjoy overall. The fourth short story in this collection is The Life Cycle of Software Objects. Now this is a curious one because this is basically the idea of AI development and sentient AI essentially, where a software company, at least starts off that way, develops a form of artificial intelligence of sorts which is quite simplistic in origin because it essentially mimics animals, and it creates essentially software pets for people to have, almost like a computer game in a form of sort of cyberspace in this futuristic world which has a more advanced form of the internet. And it questions very much a case of what makes life in a very fundamental level. Is life flesh and blood and the intelligence that we think of ourselves as having, although sometimes it leaves a lot to be desired, or is life and intelligence merely the ability to make a choice, to make that determination on you want to be more than you are now? It questions this. It asks some quite fundamental questions, some of them quite basic, some of them more complex. It never gives you an answer, again, as very few of the stories in this don't. I mean, they can't really give you answers because these are more like concept questions, but they deal with it in a really interesting way, and frankly, this was a fantastic short story. The fifth and middle short story was Daisy's Patent Automatic Nanny. This is basically the idea of the invention of a automatic sort of child rearing machine, or nanny in other words, that does all of the work of raising a child from a baby to a young person for you. And if that is right, and what it would mean for the people, because if you take out the emotion of child rearing, which obviously a machine would do, then how does that affect the child? How could it affect the child? Is it going to make a strangely disassociated child that doesn't communicate with other people, or is unable to communicate with us because it's only known this machine, this sort of learning thing? Or will it become something better, worse? It questions it. It does give you a hint of what the author may think. I'm not going to say what. Well, personally, I don't think it would be a very good idea. And it sounds a curious concept, and it's well written, and again, an amazing short story, and one that I think is well worth reading. The next short story is The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling. And this starts off with the idea of advanced technology that essentially, rather than us learning to read, the technology essentially is able to read itself, and that reads out loud to us. Therefore, are we learning to read if we can merely understand what a machine that somebody else programmed can do, or is that something else? It questions this, and it goes on to more other fundamental questions as well. Because the other thing it brings into question in a significant way is cameras that literally record all of our lives for. Essentially, it records our view on the world. And what would that mean for us on a fundamental level if we could record and look back and reflect on every single aspect of our lives? Would we end up in a situation where we are looking back more than we're looking forward? Would we just dwell on the past and never try to live our lives currently? Or would we actually think, hang on, maybe we should, look at the past, learn from our mistakes and move forward? Or would we end up only reflecting on the past and thinking of how bad things may have been? It's a curious question. It's a bit of a darker short story in some ways because of that. But it's a powerful one, and one that I think is really well written and got some fantastical ideas. I keep saying fantastic ideas in this review. Frankly, that's the normal in this book. The next short story happens to be the shortest in this collection, and that is The Great Silence. Now this is a curious one because it delves into the concept of looking for extraterrestrial or non-human life, but from the point of view of a parrot. Yes, I thought that was a bit of a surprise as well when he started talking about a parrot essentially being the narrator of the short story. It's a very short one, it's only about 5 pages long. Odd and curious, but well written, and it does bring up some interesting points about, in a very short space of time, which is frankly an achievement by itself, about what makes up life. Is life what we think it is in terms of intelligence and, you know, our way of interacting with each other, or is life merely that choice, again, as I've said earlier, about the ability to understand what's going on around it and being aware of the greater world? Is that intelligence? Is that greater life? Is that human life? Or is that something else? Is that something greater? It's a curious question, and I think it's done very interesting in this novel. The next short story, and the penultimate one in this collection, is Omphalos. This is the only short story in this collection that I didn't entirely understand and I didn't quite enjoy, and that is for one fundamental reason. That is, the short story is told through essentially the before bed prayer of a man who is going through various things or trials in his life, and he's doing his before bed prayer to God, and he's telling God his sort of trials and tribulations and what he's hoping, and sort of apologising for maybe mistakes that he's made. Now, this deals with obviously religion and faith. I am not a religious person, although I do think that having a faith is an admirable thing. You know, I don't believe in it myself, but if you want to have a belief in something greater than yourself, then that is indeed admirable and something that people do need. I personally have other ways of showing faith. I believe in people and humanity as a whole, rather than a greater presence as in God. But I do believe that each person has their own choice to make in that regard, and have no qualms with anybody, for the record. And this question that says, is your faith more than yourself? I didn't entirely understand everything this novel was trying to say, however, because I'm not an expert on this field. Faith and religion is not something I entirely am comfortable with because of what I've just said, but it delves into this in a curious way. This is one that I will definitely reread quite carefully next time I read this book. I'll try to understand it more in depth and more thoroughly. And I may well, hopefully by then, have read other books that may question faith and bring things into fore, and that might make me understand this more clearly at that future point. And finally, the last short story in this collection is Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom. Now, this is an interesting one because it deals with the idea of these little prisms that people can find that essentially link up with random different parallel worlds or multiverses, basically. You know, the whole multiverse theory of, you know, like an onion, with multiple layers of reality, I suppose you could say, on top of one another, extremely similar, with infinite variations. And this delves into the aspect of being able to communicate for a limited time, because the prisms do run out after a bit, with other parallel worlds, and communicating with parallel versions of yourself. If you could talk to a what if version of yourself, maybe if you made a major decision in your life, whether, I don't know, for instance, you went to university or you didn't go to university, or you took a job or you stayed in your current job, if you could talk to that what if version and say, did that work out for you as well? Or did that work out for me as well? It asks some curious questions here, because is that you? Are you thinking that is your decision that you made wrong or not? Because it's a very curious question, a very difficult one, because that's not you, that it's not your universe, but it sort of is because it's so similar. I mean, it's you, but not you. This story, I think, is an interesting end to that collection because it questions that and many other aspects of what it means to be human. And indeed, overall, that is what this collection does. It brings up questions on what it means to be human, both on a species level, you know, as humanity, and on a very personal, deeply psychological level. What we can do as a species is explored, and as individuals again. And this distinction between the individual and the group or society and species is an interesting one. Chiang delves into so many concepts in this, it's actually quite hard to grasp all of them at one time. But it's a fascinating collection and one that I think is extremely well written, amazing ideas with a remarkable amount, as you can obviously tell from my enthusiasm for this, of ideas. The variety is remarkable, and overall I would greatly recommend this novel for basically anybody that this sounds of interest to, because it delves into what it means to be human, which to me is important. And this is a novel that I will reread again and again over the years. So if you've read this collection, then please leave a comment and we can have a talk about it. Or if you'd like to read it, then again leave a comment, or would like more information, then you know, I'll try to answer as much as I can. All my social media link can be found in the description box below as always. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.